All right. Um, we're supposed to be live right now. Um, First of all, welcome everyone. Welcome back to some. Thank you for making time to be present at this webinar. The afternoon just before Black Friday. I know some of you might be quite busy. There might be some slight stress here and there. So maybe this is a nice moment to just give your head some space and wind down a bit and listen to what these two advertising gurus can share with you today. Um, let me take you to the intro of what we're going to discuss. First of all, my name is Sam Tielemans. I'm excited to host this session where we will unpack an award-winning meta campaign that was created by the guys here from PropellerNet for their client Pour Moi. It's one that actually doubled revenue year on year. And I know that some of you in the audience might be more focused on Google Shopping ads, but that's actually exactly why today's topic is so valuable. It is because we see that more and more retailers are realizing that the biggest gains come from a multi-channel approach. So we wanted to bring in a guest who can show how shifting part of your focus to Meta can unlock new growth opportunities. What you'll hear today is not just a meta story, it's actually a roadmap for how to successfully expand beyond search. We're breaking everything down to practical, repeatable tactics that you can apply no matter your budget, from creative testing frameworks to managing Meta's learning phase, to understand when it makes sense to move budget from search into paid social. So the goal is simple. You will all walk away with at least one tactic that you can test tomorrow, or maybe not tomorrow, but in weeks after, to make your paid social more effective. We also reserved some time at the end for a dedicated Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any time during the session, and we will gather them all by the end and make sure every question gets answered before we wrap up. And I would highly recommend doing so, because this is where you really get the nitty and gritty out of Travis and Jim. If someone would be so kind for me to already share or say hi in the chat, so we know that's working too. And then the last thing from me, the webinar will also be recorded, so you will receive the replay afterwards. I think now is a good time to jump in. Thank you, Guy and Coco, for saying hi. Perfect. Right, let's kick things off. Travis, Jim, would you please be so kind as to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, certainly. So hi, everyone. My name's Travis, and I look after the paid media team at PropellerNet. We're doing great work across the fields of paid search, paid social, programmatic, you name it, we do it. We have sort of accidentally become specialists in working with e-commerce brands just through merit of building great connections with lots of e-commerce brands over time, and in particular those that are in a sort of early growth period in their digital journey. And Pour Moi, the client that we're going to be talking about today, is a great example of that. So that's me. Jim, I'll hand over to you to intro.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. So hi, everyone. I'm Jim. I'm Director of Strategy at PropellerNet. So I've had 20 odd years in the industry, and 14 of those years have been with PropellerNet, and actually seeing a lot of those brands that Travis talks about, starting in their early stages and growing into more serious multi-channel brands. Backgrounds in paid media, really, but actually my role today is working really holistically with our clients and understanding their market, developing that growth strategy and how they can keep getting bigger and taking market share in their category, devising the right channel mix, working with Travis's team in terms of the tactics that they choose. But ultimately, it's about helping our clients get to where they want to commercially. And this is a good example of that, where a lot of those sort of holistic techniques have kind of come into play.
Great. Well, I'm sure that we're all very excited to see how you guys managed to do so.
Sure. So we'll get into it now. So firstly, just to introduce the client. So as we said, it's a client called Pour Moi, which is a UK-based lingerie swimwear nightwear brand. We've worked with these guys for many years, and as Travis said, like across paid search, paid social, programmatic, things like that, but also across SEO and digital PR. So kind of covering everything they do in the digital space, and in some cases, traditional media space. And because we've worked with them a long time, and because we've worked with them across such a broad remit, we've been able to get that real understanding of their market, how their business works, and what their priorities are. So when we get briefs in from them, we kind of have a good understanding of where they're heading and what their needs are. We got, for this specific campaign, we got a reasonably familiar brief for people in agency land, which is get more revenue for the same budget and don't kill ROAS in the process. So ideally a better ROAS or the same ROAS as we had before. And from our perspective, knowing what channels we were using, which I'll show you in a sec, knowing what channels we're using, it felt like a media mix and creative problem. So that helped us to reframe it a little bit in terms of how we really optimize our approach across the paid channels to kind of inspire the audience better from what we were doing to start with. That starting point was really using quite acquisition-focused performance media channels, the core channels being Google and Meta. And you'll see from like the channels and the tactics that we're using within those at that point, it was very bottom funnel, things like paid search with high intent keywords, Google Shopping, Performance Max. From a paid social perspective, it was all very product led. So product feeds, retargeting, advantage shopping campaigns, and dynamic ads for broad audiences. So all very kind of conversion focused and all very in-market audience focused. And from a budget perspective, we had it split roughly 50-50. We do a lot of work to understand the point of diminishing returns around channels, and that's where it kind of netted out when we'd done that research at the start of through the time that we've been working with the campaign. So this is fine, and this is working for us up to now. But with that challenge of growing the revenue, we needed to look at it a bit differently. And as I say, it only really spoke to those people with high intent to purchase. So people who are in market at that particular point in time. So we're kind of reliant on what's going on externally in market. So and we noticed a few things when we dug into it. This campaign was specifically focused around swimwear. So we use a bunch of tools to understand what's going on in our clients' markets, things like SimilarWeb and SEMrush that a lot of people probably use. We also use things like YouGov, which tells us more about what audience is doing. But in this case, it boiled down to these two simple facts, which one is there was less demand for swimwear at the point in time that we were putting this campaign together. And that's a trend we noticed kind of since 2022, the end of the pandemic. Lots of travel demand, and travel kind of links to swimwear because people would buy new swimsuits before they go on holiday. But also cost of living became a factor in this country and generally across Europe. And that was meaning that people either weren't buying as much or they were buying less frequently or not buying at all. So that's driving the demand side. But then also there's still a load of brands who want to sell swimwear. So there's more brands in market, new brands are appearing all the time, and all of that is just driving up CPCs. So the actual cost of buying our media, the way we were doing it before, was becoming more expensive. So that created the challenge for us. Effectively, it meant that the strategy we were doing beforehand wasn't going to achieve our objective because we're reliant on there being in market and we're reliant on a media cost that was increasing. So we needed to sort of reset and restart and rethink how we do the media mix and how we do creative in that context. Travis will now take you through what we actually did.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, so Jim's just talked us through the classic target that we had: more money, same budget, same ROAS sort of restrictions around that. We'd historically been doing our work in where where customers had intent, where the demand existed right now, but we were seeing that demand was decreasing, but the competition was increasing. So when it came to thinking about the key things that we needed to change, we needed to change some of the key elements of the media activity that we were actually doing during this time. So there were 3 strategic shifts that we put in place in order to help us with that quite difficult challenge that we needed to achieve. And the first of these was all around creative. In my opinion, this was the thing that had the biggest impact out of all of the tactics that we deployed during this time. And we actually don't have an in-house creative team at PropellerNet. We don't build the assets ourselves, but we have become very good at providing best practice recommendations around how to take your content that you're building as a brand or a marketing team and how you can turn that into assets that will work well on the platform. And Pour Moi really needed this because, as we've just shown you, we were using a lot of classic e-commerce tactics of product feed based activity for where demand existed at that moment. So the screenshot that you've got on the left of that Instagram ad, that's the kind of ad that we were running previously. So a static image of the product, perhaps the title, perhaps the price. And this works really well when you are speaking to someone who is in the market for swimwear, but it doesn't work as well if you are trying to inspire action in someone who's maybe not quite at that level of intent yet. So we needed to have a real shift around the style of ads and the style of creative that we were using. And the brand and marketing teams at Pour Moi were essential in helping us do that. And in short, what they were helping us create was very excellent video creative. We've only got static versions of the ads to show you today, but essentially, if you look at the ads from 2023, it's what I've just been talking about in terms of static ads powered by a product feed that don't move, that are just, the image themselves. And as I say, that works very well for your audiences who are ready to purchase from you or from a competitor and so on. We completely changed everything that we were doing in this way by taking all of the amazing video content that Pour Moi had started to create, and we started using that in the ads that we were placing on Meta. And it wasn't just, give us any video you've got and we'll try and make it work. The team at Pour Moi were putting very conscious effort into the style of videos that they were creating, so that there were key themes that were running throughout all of those. So with the ads that we've got on screen at the moment, what this meant was we moved away from all of those data feed powered assets that used just product data and simple imagery and things like that. And we started creating videos, for example, that featured influencers. So we had an influencer called Gok1, who, if you're in the UK, you'll be potentially familiar with his name. He is a big name in the world of fashion, and in particular for the target audience that Pour Moi have. So he was an excellent choice as a brand advocate. And actually, some of the video ads that we placed that featured Gok1 in have been some of the best performing ad creatives that I have ever seen. It was so instantaneous, the uplift that we got from those ads in particular, that straight away we knew, okay, this is the right direction to head in. We need to be doing more of this style of thing. So we had this big campaign with him, but we also had partnerships with micro influencers who were still perfect for the target audience, but they perhaps just didn't have the huge following, but they were still helping us get more of the brand message and more of the product features out there. We also started working directly with some of the models that were modeling the products that Pour Moi were selling. So as I've said, historically, it would just be at a photo shoot, it would just be statics that we were getting in terms of imagery. The Pour Moi team then started creating video assets at those shoots as well, where they would invite the models to speak directly to the camera. We called these chatty videos, where they would start talking about what they liked about the product, the product features themselves, and so on. And this was really helpful because we went from having static, non-moving imagery to video in motion imagery of the products, which is really important for products like this, where people need to try and understand how they'll look, how they'll feel where they're wearing these products. There are specific features that Jim and I would never have understood which specific features were needed for these kinds of products, but Pour Moi were absolute experts, so they were able to help guide through some of those things that needed to be sort of mentioned there. And we had loads of these. We were able to massively increase the number of assets that we had, and they were all incredibly successful on the platform. So straight away, as soon as we started running the first of these videos, we knew that this was the right direction for us to head in. Which leads me to our second point in terms of the strategic change that needed to happen. So earlier, Jim mentioned that a big part of this challenge was a media plan challenge, where we'd identified what the diminishing returns were on Google and Meta already within the realms of, only talking to people where there was demand. But if that demand was shrinking and we needed to increase revenue, it wasn't going to be enough just to sit sort of at the bottom of the buying process. We needed to be able to do things that would almost create the demand for us, capturing sort of our own demand. So after we started seeing some of these ads, like the GOK1 ad, perform so well so quickly, we started making quite significant shifts in where we were allocating our budget. So we moved quite far away from the 50-50 budget between those two channels, and we reinvested a lot of that back into Meta. So we didn't obviously grow out Meta and keep Google where it was, because obviously we didn't have more money in this campaign. So we took that budget and we basically moved it so that we weren't just capturing demand, but we were also inspiring action as well, which was obviously very successful. And that meant we were reducing our reliance on the market itself, because we were able to create these journeys with new customers in a different ecosystem. And finally, from a very practical perspective, our client was spending a lot of time and a lot of resource creating these videos. So we really wanted to just get them in front of people so that time wasn't wasted. So shifting more budget into Meta wasn't just because performance was good. It was also in respect to the time and energy that the brand and the marketing teams had gone into in building all of those assets. And then finally, and I'll be interested to hear any opinions around this, because we have differences of opinions even within PropellerNet. And when Jim and I was putting this slide together, even we had a conversation and thought, actually, is this the right message? But I was in charge of putting the slides together. So I said, yeah, it is the right message. And that was that we needed to move away from a single source of truth for measurement. So Jim and myself have been in the industry long enough that we'll remember a period where source of truth measurement was almost a buzzword, and everyone was trying to find the solution that was right for them. And normally that was Google Analytics. This is before GA4 kind of completely changed how that system works. And we would say to our clients, we need a single source of truth so that we could show you how performance is going. Today, we're struggling to do that. For almost all of our clients, we have several sources of truth, and they all say completely different things. They're not all wrong, but they're also not all 100% right either. So if you go to your Google Ads campaigns and you look at your Google Ads attribution, I'm pretty sure Google's going to tell you that it's the best platform. Meta's going to do that for itself as well. GA4 might say direct or organic is the best, and in a way, they're all right, but in a way, they're also all wrong. So in a campaign like this, where we were changing fundamentally the creative visual, and we were fundamentally changing our media plan, it wasn't going to be enough to just look at Meta or just look at Google, because both of those platforms are going to have things to say about that change. So what we did is we grabbed as many different platforms as we possibly could to create a wider view of performance, where all of these different platforms were saying slightly different things, but we were using that to sort of form a jigsaw puzzle of what the total view would actually be. So of course, we still looked at the platform data, and we still made most of our optimization decisions based on what the platforms were telling us. But we also got very close to the pure sales data that Pour Moi were seeing in their own sort of back end of data, because really that was going to be the thing that, they're still an owner-based business. When we're having conversations with them, it's important that they are seeing the revenue figures change, rather than me saying, Facebook is seeing the revenue change. If they're not feeling it, that's not right. So we got a close view of what the sales data looked like, as well as the platform data. And during this period, we were also testing marketing mix modeling as well. So we were using Phosphor for this. This is one of the more recent sort of measurement solutions that we've been seeing over the last few years. And what Phosphor was doing is it was kind of showing us what channels we might be over investing in or under investing in. And that was reassuring us basically that putting more budget into Meta was the right thing to do. So we were using all of that essentially to get that single view of performance. So when it comes, and really those were the three strategic changes that we made. So we needed to increase revenue. We had the same budget and the same return on ad spend restrictions. Traditionally, we'd only been targeting people where demand was currently at, where the intent was highest. So we had to change all of those things because the demand was shrinking. We did that by completely changing the way that the creative looked and the way it felt, so that people were able to see real people wearing these products, as well as influencers and micro influencers that they trusted. We saw that performing really well very quickly. So we shifted budget from, just 50-50 Google and Meta to more of that into Meta. And when we were measuring that, we looked at as many different data sources as we possibly could, all of which was showing us that we were making the right decisions and we were able to continue investing in this particular area. Which is all sounds great, but unless it works, who really cares? And in this instance, obviously, performance was fantastic. So the most important metric you've got on the screen here is the revenue figure, because that was the metric that we needed to see increase. And we did. We saw it increase 180% year over year, which was a huge change for this team. This is a client who is very smart with marketing and paid media, and they have an excellent team in place to help them with this. So it's rare that you have a strategic shift that creates results of this nature when you've got people like that behind the scenes. So this was fantastic. And it was because we were able to change the way we measured, change the way that we were using our media plan, that we were able to really lean into that. So huge results there with the revenue increasing, but also from an engagement perspective, I wouldn't personally have expected to see click-through rate increase, moving from product static-based imagery through to using video. Video obviously creates video plays. It doesn't always create people coming through to the website, but in this instance, they absolutely did. More people came through to the website, and obviously more people bought the products as well. And in comparison to the videos that we ran the year prior, because we did have some, we didn't lean into it, but we had a few, the amount of the frequency to which a user would watch 100% of the video increased by a third. So huge changes and growth in revenue, and also huge changes and growth in engagement as well. And obviously, the reason we're talking to you about that today is because it was recognized. We were able to win an award from it. And what was great as well about, we've all been to awards dues. They're a lot of fun. We always try and take our clients, and we took Pour Moi to this awards do. So it was great to go up and collect the award with them, especially because this campaign really feels like, obviously, our expertise and our work was a huge part of winning this. I'm not going to not say that, but we wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't for the expertise sitting in the marketing team at Pour Moi, and if they hadn't been building such fantastic assets. Obviously, none of this would have worked. So it felt like a real team effort, and stoked to sort of pick up that award. And that's really the crux of what we did, Sam. So we've got some tactics that we can talk some people through as well afterwards, but I thought maybe we pause there and see if there have been any questions or anything like that.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you already. And also nice to see you gave out so much props to Pour Moi. I think some of us might also be in a position where there's not always a client that has that much insights and willingness on their end, and they need a bit more convincing, and we need to change into the role to also be able to show them that that it might be the right time to push to Meta. And I think this is a very helpful way, the things that you guys are sharing, for us to have that conversation. I have indeed some questions lined up, but I also do see that we have someone who's also lined up some questions for you guys. So I think we are, as May and myself, we are quite on the same page here. And I also definitely like to invite others to put in their questions now, before Travis will take us to the final tactics that you can take away. Okay, so Esme, her first question was about the targeting that you used for these meta ads. Was it mostly broad targeting or also retargeting?
Yeah, a great question. And it was both. What we were doing in the previous iteration before we made all of these changes, a lot of that we were leaning into campaign types like Advantage Plus shopping campaigns and things like that. So that's algorithmic targeting. We're not necessarily setting the parameters there. But what we were finding is a high portion of those were returning customers. So it was essentially mostly a retargeting campaign. So part of this, and it was going to be one of my tactics, so it was a good question to ask, is we shifted. We still did that because obviously retargeting is a big part of what we'll do, but we also lent into what almost feels like slightly traditional ways of doing social targeting, where we would build out audiences based on interests and lookalikes and things like that, which we kind of don't do as often. But with this client, there are nuances in the different customer groups that, you know, Jim and I can't really understand. So this was an area where we worked very closely with the client to sort of be like, well, how does a swimwear customer look compared to a nightwear or a lingerie, etc. customer? So we ended up doing a combination of, we kept Advantage Plus audiences live. We also built little buckets of different audiences based on interests and lookalikes as well.
Right, that's a very extensive answer. I hope that'll help, Esme. We will take it to her second question, which was how you decided what part of the budget will go to Google or to other platforms.
Yeah, excellent question. So mostly we just did that on performance. So we had quite a wide range of investment across the different product areas on Google. So we just took those areas that we felt weren't performing as well. We looked at things like profit margin for different product categories as well. So focusing a bit more where we can make more money with a single sale essentially, and started moving budget over there as well. And then once it started really working, it was more just taking percentages of total budget and moving that over into Meta.
Right, thank you. Final question, also from Esme. Do you see this, and this is something that I also had in mind, do you see this shift in creatives work for other businesses? Are there businesses who still be all right with product feeds? So kind of what's the scalability for this, or how applicable would this be for any others on other clients? Hence, you know, Pour Moi was already there to be creative and create those. Some others might need some more convincing yet, or don't have that resources themselves.
Yeah, I'm going to try and give you a short answer so that because Jim covers a lot more clients than I do, so he may be able to speak more to sort of the wider client portfolio. For me personally, I think it would work for almost any business. I think the creative image, definitely for this campaign, but for most campaigns, is the most essential part. It's the message that you're obviously putting out there. In some instances, you're going to be limited by what you can produce naturally. So I would say a product-based ad is, you know, it's quick, it's efficient. You don't have to sort of look after it so much. That can be effective. You can have that in place as maybe like step one, and then show proof of positive performance there, and then try and get the budget for a wider sort of creative expansion. But Jim, what are you thinking for, you know, a wider range of industries and things like that?
Yeah, I think from my view is that most businesses get to a point where it's important. So you can go through that first 2-3 years of scale up, just leaning on product and just leaning on bottom of funnel. But at some point, you've got the sales from the people who are going to buy from you in that way. And that's when you need to move to the next step. And it's been, again, post-pandemic, you had a lot of e-commerce brands that did very well over that period because it was the only way people could shop and get things. And they all experienced that scale up really quickly. And now the last 2 years, really, we've seen more and more brands hitting that ceiling where their CPAs are increasing, and they've had to start thinking differently, and start moving into different areas and doing it differently. So that's the thing. If you're at a point where you feel like your channels are at ceiling, and that's when it's sort of worth starting to think about that rethink. And if you're really exposed to what the market demand is doing, then actually getting further up the funnel and creating some demand and creating some consideration is the next step.
I'd even say that some should maybe not wait till they hit that ceiling.
Yeah, of course.
You know, embrace it rather sooner than later. And also, if you were to be dealing with a client that might have very limited resources, also in doing creative image or video generations themselves, there was a massive update from Google last week with Nano Banana that also shook up the market. So that might be helpful in the near future. All right, as May says, thank you for the answers. So thank you, guys. Let me throw in one just before you take us to the last part of your talk. I'm very much interested about the way where you implemented part of the cost of sale model, the way you had this marketing mix, and you know, the tracking part for your attribution to see you know, what the actual impact is and where is it coming from. How did your Google Ads performance change from this move to Meta partially? And was most of the revenue actually coming from Meta? Was it still Google? Could you take me on that?
Yeah, the last part I'll answer first in that. Most of the revenue was coming from Meta, and it wasn't even necessarily that it was Meta's attribution, because obviously we expect it to overinflate some of its reporting there. In some instances, we were launching video ads that featured a product that Pour Moi had never promoted before and weren't promoting anywhere else. And we were hearing from the client that they'd sold out of that product a couple of days later. So when we were looking at all of the different platforms that we could see, that was really helpful for us, because we were able to basically identify, oh, well, Meta can't track that product's doing really well, and neither can GA4. But if we know we're already sold out and that message isn't anywhere else, then we know that that's doing well. So attribution kind of became a foggy thing where we absolutely looked at it, but we made a few decisions based on instinct as well. In terms of Google's performance, it didn't necessarily diminish that much. We were obviously spending less, so we were making less revenue from that platform based on its attribution. And we were having lots of questions asked of us from our Google rep about why we were shrinking our investment in that space. But the money that we were generating from all of that Meta activity far outweighed, that diminishing return. Because we were really finding the more budget we put in that area, the more we were inflating the cost of a click, rather than getting in front of more audiences that were sort of ready to purchase.
I see that Thiago asked a question that aligns to this, and I'm curious to see to what extent you would be able to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Was the incremental revenue coming mostly from having capitalized on the warm audiences, or actually the prospecting?
Yeah, good question. And the revenue was being attributed to all of the campaigns that we were running. So broadly speaking, we structure activity between prospecting and, you could call it retargeting, but it's mostly prospecting and Advantage Plus, or I suppose you could call it prospecting and then data feed powered assets, which would be Advantage Plus and the dynamic ads for broad audiences, etc. The attribution in platform was showing strong return on ad spend for most of the assets that we were running. So it came from across the board, really, which I wouldn't typically expect to see. I would normally see it move through to the Advantage Plus campaigns, but in this instance, that wasn't the case.
Great. Thanks, Travis. I hope that answers your question, Thiago. Please feel free, people, to drop in some more. We still got some time left, but now I'd like to see what else you've got lined up and tactics you want to share with us to make this actually work.
Yeah, so I wanted to try and give 5 specific things that we did as tactics. Some of those are specific to tactics within media platforms. Some of them are operational, administrative tactics, which we don't always think about in the world of paid media, but being administratively strong can really help with your campaigns as well. So we've got 5 of those that we wanted to leave you with today. The first was that we had very specific rules around the optimization processes that we put in place. We had a fairly uncommon challenge with this campaign where we suddenly had loads and loads of assets, most of us will be more used to only, having too few assets and needing to sort of stretch them very thin. Because we were getting so many assets from the client, and obviously they were putting time and energy into doing that, we wanted to get as many of them live as possible. But that also meant, we were recommending a certain number of ads to have live per audience, per ad set, etc. So that often meant, well, hey, can we pause some of these ads and put some of these new ones in, even though the other ones had only gone live perhaps the week or so before. So to make sure that all of the ads were able to get through a learning phase and we could actually make sure that we were learning how they would actually perform, we had a rule of thumb where we wouldn't pause an ad until it had around 2K spend behind it. This is dependent on the objective you might be running on Meta, because if you've got a traffic campaign, you're getting data a lot quicker. Most of our work was sales focused. So we found, based on our analysis, that if an ad had reached that level, we would be able to confidently analyze its performance to know whether it was working or wasn't working. So we created these rules. Sometimes we abandoned those rules if that product was out of stock, or if there was a particular reason, a sale or something, that we wanted to push something new. But as a rule of thumb, we tried to follow that as an optimization rule. We had, as I say, loads of assets available. And I think if you didn't have a background in fashion, especially not swimwear fashion, you might look at all of those videos and think actually they're very similar. But as I said earlier, there were some very intentional themes across all of them. And we worked very hard on making sure that we were analyzing what those themes were doing. Back when I started my industry, 10, 15 years ago, we did a lot of creative A/B testing. So you would have fixed, 3 or 4 fixed ads that you were running, and you would analyze A versus B versus C, etc. Today, as we'll all know, a lot of the ad delivery is dynamic and it's automated, and it can look like any number of sort of variations. So strict A/B testing is far less common in our field today. So we just made sure we really tracked all of the themes that were being explored in all of the assets, and then sort of analyzed that at a broader level. So we still did creative testing, and we do this style of creative testing with a lot of clients. It was just very different to how maybe some of us are used to doing it. I kind of answered this with Esme's question, but we expanded the audience targeting that we had in place. So if you are an e-commerce brand, or you're a brand that's focusing on just generating as many results as you can for your budget, if you're letting the algorithm decide who to show those ads to, it's probably finding the people that have already been to your website, or they've maybe purchased from you before, things like that. We'd become a bit reliant on that previously because it was generating a lot of revenue for us. For this to work, for us to be able to inspire action as well as capture demand, we needed to figure out who all of the relevant audiences were. So we worked very closely with the client to figure out all of those different buckets, which is what I mentioned earlier. So bringing back some of those traditional audiences, interests, lookalikes, and things like that. And still audiences that were powered by first-party data that we were getting from the client as well. This one is a real operational administrative one, in that we needed to kind of create a schedule around getting these assets live, and we needed to understand the seasonality of these things as well. So as Jim was saying, swimwear can tend to behave quite similar to travel audiences, or when people are about to go on a warm holiday or something like that. So we needed to understand what the seasonality of these products was going to look like, so we knew when to sort of launch them, and also when to stagger the different activity as well. So you don't want to launch 2 different influencer ads at the same time, because you're going to have a huge spike and then maybe nothing, but you can keep that spike growing by having one very popular ad and then another one sort of a few weeks later. So we had to get a good schedule in place to figure these out as well, so that we could just have a good quality assurance process in place to make sure that the ads were going to display as we wanted them to, and things like that. Anyone using Meta today, and if Meta's on the call, I'd like to have a conversation with them about this as well. It's the hardest platform in terms of them adding settings that will trip you up when you're building assets. And you can go through and check every single setting hundreds of times, and it will still change something just as you push it live. So this was really important. We always had 2 people checking those ads when they went live as well. And because we had so many, obviously there was a time restraint in putting those in place. And then the last one, was we had to kind of ignore a lot of the rule books for this, or at least read a paragraph of one of the pages of the rule book and then make something else up to go along with it. And I think actually a lot of paid media professionals have to do that today, because what the platforms want you to do in terms of campaign consolidation and AI powered targeting and things like that, it's not always what your client wants you to do, because your client wants you to be accountable to all of the decisions that you're making. They want to know who you're spending money, what you're spending money on, and who you're showing it to. So we had to get very comfortable working in a way that kind of did a little bit of both, but also things that weren't best practice in either. And we were making a lot of decisions based on instinct as a result, which, you know, the client was helping us with this as well. They, as I've been saying a few times, they really know this market. And that's when, you know, an example of that is what I was saying earlier, where we launched a product that wasn't being promoted anywhere else. It was then sold out on the website. So we knew instinctively that was because of the meta ads, because it wasn't in an email campaign. It wasn't prominent on the website. So having that hybrid approach, when you have this great relationship with your client, can work really well. Obviously, it's based on trust and all of those sorts of things as well. But in this instance, I think it was really sort of fundamental into making this work. And those are the tactics, I would say, that were essential for this campaign working.
Brilliant, thanks. All right, I'd like to point myself to the chat once more. Also, people, if you feel these are some practical tips that you feel are helpful, it's also nice to let us know. Now the question of Esme again was this creative testing done in one ad set?
It was in a few. It was in a few ad sets based on the different sort of buckets of audiences that we created. So it was across quite a few. Yeah.
Great. And then another question was how often you changed the creatives apart from the 2K spend?
So I would say we had new assets going in on a weekly basis. We tried to limit them as much as possible. So as we've said, we had that limit around trying to get enough spend and enough data through the ads to be able to analyze how well they were actually doing. But we were very fortunate that we had enough assets that on a weekly basis, we were essentially structuring and building new ads.
Right. And then one question that I thought was answered, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to ask it to verify with you. Tiago asked, when testing, how much would the average minimum spend each ad would, how much would be the average minimum spend each ad would get before you consider it successful?
Yeah, that was the rule of thumb of around 2K.
Yeah.
There were some instances where if we were getting close to that, we would pull the plug early. And you might also know with Meta that often an ad just doesn't get any delivery. If you've got another ad that's doing really well in that ad set, Meta may not run it at all. So if it was a product that the client wasn't super invested in, we would say, okay, as long, you know, if you're happy to not get the insights on performance there, we'll take that out and we'll build a new one in. And that often happened when we launched an ad that started doing very well, such as those influencer ads. They would take up almost all of the activity. And there were times where the client was saying, can we turn this ad off? And we were saying, do we have to? It's performing so well that we really want to keep it live, but it was because the products were sold out or, you know, whatever it might be. So yeah, the rule of thumb was 2K, but there were circumstances around that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you a lot, Travis. And also thank you from Esme for the answers. Thank you, people who put in the questions. I'd like to get this to a closure. For all the people that are going to be watching the recording or are watching the recording right now, if you have any questions coming from watching this webinar, you can reach out to hello@producthero.com. We'll make sure that if it's a question that's meant to be for Travis or Jim, that I'll send those across. Also, if you feel like you want to take this next step, but you need some support or you need someone to help you going into Meta, I'm sure PropellerNet is a great partner to sort you with this problem. And we as Product Hero also are now part of the company called Channable, which is also your multi-channel partner. So from that point on, we will also be able to support you on your way to Meta in regards to feed management. I see another question popping in from Esme. If PropellerNet is also active in the Netherlands?
Yeah, all through Europe. We have a lot of our e-commerce clients. We've helped with expansion through Europe. So yes, and thank you for all of your questions, Esme, as well.
All right. Okay. Maybe one final question that I think that maybe did not really get clear yet was if you'd phased out the old ads while you were implementing these new creatives, or if it was a total rapid shift at once for this new approach.
We still use some of those data feed-based ads. They're not as large a part of the structure as they have been in the past. There may be, and it changes seasonally and with different products, but perhaps 20 to 30% of total spend. We really use those for the warmest sort of retargeting based audiences that we will put into place there.
Awesome. Okay. All right, guys. Final question, guys. This is Thiago once more. Did you use any segmentation based on Product Hero's labelizer or any other segmentation?
Not for the prospecting activity. We've done a lot of segmentation within the data feed sort of product-based ads. So we would do that with things like, if we are running swimwear ads, we might have an ad which is just powered by the best sellers of that campaign, excluding any that have got low profit margins and things like that as well. So broadly speaking, yes, we do use it quite regularly, but for the bulk of this work, it was just those video assets as you see them, just that sort of storytelling assets.
Awesome. All right. Travis, Jim, thank you once more for being a speaker in this webinar today. Being so transparent and sharing those practical insights is something that I really appreciate, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the audience as well. So to you people who watch this webinar or will watch this, also thank you very much for joining us or to sign up. Remember, success on Meta isn't just about big budgets. It's also about smart creative, strong signals, and continuous iteration. I think that's one takeaway we can all get from this talk. We'll be sending out the recording shortly. Keep an eye on your inbox, and any more questions, feel free to reach out to hello@producthero.com. Until next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.